I found out my wife was pregnant in a restaurant where the lights were low enough to make bad news feel private. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She sat across from me with both hands around her water glass and told me the baby wasn't mine, like she had already practiced the sentence 100 times. The worst part wasn't even the affair at first. It was how calm she was, like she had come there to brief me on a business problem she expected me to help solve. Teresa had picked the place herself, which should have warned me. She always chose quiet places when she wanted control, places where raising your voice made you look like the unstable one. I remember the waiter setting down the menus, her barely glancing at hers, and me thinking she looked tired from the trip she had taken a few weeks earlier. She had called it a reset, a little time away with friends, something she said she needed because life had become too routine. I didn't love it, but I didn't fight her on it either. I trusted her. Or maybe I trusted the version of our marriage I thought we still had. She waited until after we ordered to say it. "Nolan, I'm pregnant." I just looked at her for a second because my mind didn't catch up right away. There are things you expect to feel in that moment. Shock, excitement, fear, something normal. But before any of that could land, she added, "It's not yours." I didn't move. I didn't reach for my glass. I didn't ask who right away. I just sat there and let the words sit between us because if I spoke too fast, I knew I might say something I couldn't take back. She told me his name was Grant Sutter. She said she met him during the trip, that it wasn't planned, that things got complicated, which was a nice clean word for what she had done. I asked her to say it plainly, and she looked annoyed, not ashamed, annoyed that I was making her use the real words. "I slept with him," she said, quieter now, "and I'm keeping the baby." That was when I noticed something I couldn't ignore. She wasn't confessing because guilt had finally caught up with her. She was presenting a situation she expected me to accept. I asked her what she wanted from me, and she didn't hesitate. That bothered me more than the answer. "We stay married," she said. "We raise the baby together. We don't let this destroy everything." I remember almost laughing because she made it sound like the marriage was being attacked by weather, like some outside storm had rolled in and damaged our roof. I said, "So you go on a trip, get pregnant by another man, come home, and now I'm supposed to help protect the life you blew up." She leaned forward and told me to stop making it sound ugly. That was the first time my stomach really turned, because ugly was exactly what it was. Then she showed me what the dinner was really about. Her voice got colder, not loud, just sharp enough to let me know the soft part was over. She said if I refused, we would divorce, and she had already spoken to someone who explained what she could take. Half the house, a piece of the business, accounts I had built before she ever cared about numbers. She said it like she was reminding me of the weather forecast. "I'm not threatening you," she said. "I'm telling you what happens if you make this harder." I stared at her across that table and realized she had not come to ask for forgiveness. She had come with terms. For a few seconds, I actually wondered if I was hearing her wrong. That sounds stupid now, but in the moment, your brain tries to save you from the obvious. I thought maybe she was scared, maybe she was trying to sound strong because she didn't know how to admit she had ruined us. Then she said, "You need to think about the bigger picture," and whatever tiny piece of me was still looking for the woman I married went quiet. I said, "You're carrying another man's child, and you're telling me to think bigger." She didn't blink. She told me I was being emotional, like that was the real problem at the table. The waiter came by with our food and froze halfway through, asking if everything was okay. Teresa's plate sat in front of her, untouched. Mine might as well have been empty because I couldn't have swallowed a bite if my life depended on it. I asked for the check and she snapped. "We just got our food." I said, "I'm done." She lowered her voice then, trying to pull me back into the controlled little room she had built around the conversation. She told me I was making a mistake, that pride would cost me, that I didn't understand how badly divorce could hurt me. I paid the bill, stood up, and looked down at her long enough for her confidence to slip for the first time. She said, "If you walk out, you're choosing the hard way." I remember that sentence clearly because she still thought she was the one handing out choices. I put on my jacket and told her there wasn't an easy way anymore, not after what she had done. She called my name once when I turned toward the door. I didn't stop, but I won't pretend I felt strong in that exact second. I felt sick. I felt embarrassed. I felt like everybody in that restaurant could somehow see what had just happened to me. But by the time I reached the sidewalk, one thing was clear enough to hold on to. I was not raising Grant Sutter's child, and I was not letting Teresa use my own life as a weapon against me. I didn't drive home. I drove to my brother Warren's place and sat in his kitchen while he stood there in sweatpants, confused and half awake, waiting for me to talk. When I finally told him Teresa was pregnant and the baby wasn't mine, his face changed so fast it almost made it feel real all over again. I gave him the whole thing. The trip, the restaurant, the ultimatum, the way she had already checked what she could take from me. Warren didn't interrupt until I was finished. Then he leaned back, rubbed his face, and said, "That wasn't panic, Nolan. That was preparation." I already knew he was right, but hearing someone else say it made the room feel colder. It also told me what I had to do next. Warren didn't let me leave right away. He kept asking small, practical questions, the kind that sound cold when your life is falling apart, but are exactly what you need. Did she say anything in writing? Did she mention Grant before tonight? Did she move money? Did she take documents? I kept saying no, not that I knew of, and each answer made me feel dumber. Not because I should have predicted an affair, but because I had been sitting across from someone who had clearly prepared, and I had walked into that restaurant with nothing but trust. Around midnight, I drove back to the house, mostly because I couldn't stand not knowing what Teresa had already done. The street was quiet when I pulled in, and her car wasn't in the driveway. That alone told me something. She hadn't gone home to fall apart. She had gone somewhere else, probably to tell the first version of the story before I had a chance to breathe. I sat in the car for a minute with my hand still on the wheel, looking at the porch light we had picked out together 2 summers before, and for a stupid second, I hated that light more than I hated anything else. Inside, the house didn't feel like home. It felt like a place someone had already started sorting through. A drawer in the hallway table was half open. Some of her things were missing from the bathroom counter. In the bedroom, her side of the closet had gaps in it, not empty, but planned empty, like she had taken enough to stay gone for a while without making it too obvious. That was the second time that night I had to admit to myself that Teresa was not confused. She had been working ahead of me. Her laptop was on the dresser. That surprised me because Teresa was careful with people but lazy with devices. She reused passwords, left tabs open, saved things in places she forgot about. I stood there for longer than I want to admit, staring at that laptop and feeling the line in my head between privacy and self-defense get thinner. Then I thought about her sitting in that restaurant, telling me she had already looked into what she could take. I opened it. It took less than a minute to get in, and when the screen lit up, my stomach dropped before I even found anything. I searched Grant's name first. I didn't scroll around trying to punish myself. I didn't want every detail. I wanted to know whether the dinner had been fear or strategy. The messages started out exactly how people pretend these things start. Little jokes, casual check-ins, nothing serious, nothing they would admit was already crossing a line. Then the dates moved closer to the trip and the tone changed. They weren't just flirting, they were planning around me, talking about what I noticed, what I didn't notice, how Teresa could explain being distant, how she could make me feel guilty for asking questions. The pregnancy messages were worse because they were clean. Not emotional, not shocked. Clean. Grant wrote that I would probably fold once Teresa explained the financial side because men like me were too attached to comfort to risk a real fight. He actually used the word comfort, like my marriage, my business, my house, and my name were just soft things I would protect by swallowing whatever she handed me. Teresa didn't push back. She didn't say, "Don't talk about my husband like that." She answered like they were discussing a strategy that made sense. That was the line that changed it for me. The affair hurt, but this was different. This was them deciding what kind of man I was and building their plan around that insult. I forwarded the messages to myself, then took photos of the screen with my phone in case anything disappeared later. My hands were steady, which bothered me a little. I thought I would be shaking. I thought I would be furious in some loud, obvious way. Instead, I felt like something inside me had gone flat and useful. I grabbed bank records, insurance papers, business documents, spare keys, anything she could lose or twist if this turned into the kind of fight she seemed ready for. I wasn't stealing from my own house. I was making sure the truth didn't depend on Teresa's honesty. Before I left, I stood in the bedroom doorway and looked back once. The bed was still made. Her perfume was still on the dresser. There were still framed photos on the wall from vacations where I used to think we looked happy. That part got to me more than the messages. Maybe because the messages were clear and the photos were not. The photos made me feel stupid in a quieter way. I turned off the light, locked the door behind me, and drove back to Warren's with the proof sitting in my phone like a weight. Teresa thought I was going to wake up scared of losing everything. Instead, by sunrise, I knew exactly what she had tried to do. Teresa called before 8 a.m., which told me she had either slept badly or not slept at all. I let it ring twice because I wanted my voice steady before I answered. She didn't say good morning. She didn't ask where I was. She just said, "We need to talk somewhere normal," like the restaurant had failed because of the location and not because she had tried to hand me another man's child with a financial threat attached. I told her 6 p.m., the cafe near my office, and then I hung up before she could turn it into another controlled conversation. She was already there when I walked in, sitting at a corner table with her coat folded beside her and her phone face down like she had come prepared to perform calm. I knew that look. It was the look she used when she wanted people to think she was the reasonable one in the room. She gave me a small, careful smile and said, "You look better today." I sat across from her and said, "I know more today." That wiped the smile off her face for half a second, but she recovered fast. She started with softer language this time, saying we had both been emotional, saying we needed to protect what we had built, saying the baby didn't have to be the thing that destroyed our marriage. I let her talk because I wanted to see how much of the same script she would use when she thought I was still blind. When she finally paused, I put my phone on the table and turned the screen toward her. I had the messages pulled up already, not all of them, just enough. The ones about timing, the ones about me folding, the ones where Grant talked about what I would be afraid to lose, and Teresa answered like that was a fair read on me. She picked up the phone with this irritated little frown, like she expected to see something minor she could explain away. Then she started scrolling, and the color left her face in a way I had never seen before. She looked up and asked, "Where did you get this?" I said, "Your laptop." She opened her mouth like she was about to accuse me of invading her privacy, and I stopped her right there. "Don't try that," I said. "Not after last night." She set the phone down slowly, but her hand stayed near it, like touching it might somehow make the messages less real. "You're taking pieces out of context," she said, and that almost made me laugh because context was the only thing making it worse. I told her it looked like she and Grant had discussed how to pressure me before she ever sat down at that restaurant. She said they were scared and trying to figure out what to do. I said, "No, scared people panic. You planned." That got under her skin. Her voice tightened, and she told me I was turning one mistake into a war. I asked her which part was the mistake: sleeping with him, getting pregnant, looking into my assets, or deciding I was weak enough to accept all of it if the price of refusing got high enough. For the first time, Teresa didn't have an answer ready. She looked past me toward the counter, then back at me, and tried a different angle. "There's still a child involved," she said. I told her the child had a father, and it wasn't me. She said I was her husband, like that word still gave her rights to my future after she had already dragged someone else into our marriage. I told her I was filing, and she leaned forward fast enough that the table shook. "Nolan, don't do this," she said. And that was the first real fear I heard from her. Not fear of losing me, fear of losing control of the story. I stood up before she could start begging in public or threatening me in a softer voice. She said my name twice, once angry and once low enough that it almost sounded wounded. I walked out anyway. What she didn't know was that I had a second phone recording in my jacket pocket the whole time. I hated that I had to think like that, but Teresa had already shown me what happened when she thought only her version would survive. By the time I got to my car, I had the messages saved, the cafe conversation recorded, and a clear picture of the next problem. She wasn't just trying to control me anymore, she was going to try to control everyone around us. 2 days later, Glenn Porter called me from a job site and asked if everything was all right at home. He sounded uncomfortable, which told me the answer before he gave it. I asked him what he had heard, and he said Teresa's friend Patrice had been telling people I had been distant, drinking more, getting angry, making Teresa feel trapped. I sat there at my desk, listening to a man I had worked with for years repeat a version of my life that had been built to make her affair look like a symptom instead of a choice. After I hung up, I drove straight to Patrice's house. She opened the door, saw me, and her face tightened because guilty people always look surprised when the person they're talking about shows up in front of them. I told her exactly what Teresa had done, exactly what I had proof of, and exactly what would come out if this went to court. Patrice didn't apologize, she just went quiet, and that was enough to tell me the rumor campaign was already moving. I didn't go to Patrice's house because I cared what she thought of me. I went because Teresa had started building a version of the story where I was the problem, and if I waited too long, that version would be the one people repeated without thinking. Patrice stood on her porch with her arms folded, trying to look offended, but the second I said Grant's name, her face changed. She knew enough. Maybe not everything, but enough to understand she had not just been supporting a friend. She had been helping Teresa soften the ground before the truth landed. I told Patrice I wasn't there to argue with her, and I meant it. I said Teresa had cheated, came back pregnant, and then tried to use the divorce laws as a leash. Patrice kept saying, "That's not what she told me," as if that cleared her from repeating it. I told her the messages would be part of the case, the timeline would be part of the case, and anyone who helped spread a fake story about me was going to have to live with that when the real one came out. She said it sounded like a threat. I told her it was a warning she was lucky to hear before a lawyer had to say it for me. That night, I made calls I never wanted to make. Clients, vendors, 2 people from the bank, and a few men I had worked with long enough to know rumors could cost me real money if I ignored them. I kept it short every time because the longer you explain, the more desperate you sound. I said Teresa and I were divorcing, she was pregnant by another man, and anything suggesting I had become unstable or dangerous was false. Some people went quiet because they had clearly heard the other version first. A couple apologized. Glenn just said, "I figured something was off," which was the closest thing to comfort I got that whole week. The next morning, I met Arthur Keene in an office that smelled like coffee, printer ink, and people trying not to fall apart. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, no fake sympathy in his face. I liked that immediately. He didn't say, "I'm sorry you're going through this," 3 different ways like people do when they don't know what else to say. He just asked me to start at the beginning, so I did. Restaurant, pregnancy, Grant, financial threat, laptop messages, cafe recording, rumors. When I finished, I slid the printed screenshots across his desk and watched him read without changing expression. Arthur took his time with the messages. He read the ones where Grant said I would fold, the ones where Teresa discussed timing, and the ones that tied the pregnancy to pressure instead of panic. Then he leaned back and said, "This is not just an affair problem." I asked him what that meant, and he tapped the pages with one finger. He said Teresa had connected false paternity expectations to financial consequences, and that mattered. He couldn't promise me a clean win, because lawyers who promise clean wins are usually selling something, but he said the evidence gave us room to fight hard on the assets, the business, and any attempt to paint me as the unstable spouse. We filed that afternoon. Divorce, protection of business interests, formal challenge to paternity, and documentation of the rumor pattern in case it became useful later. Teresa was served the next morning, and I knew exactly when because my phone started lighting up within the hour. She called 3 times, then texted that I was overreacting and turning a private family matter into a public disaster. I almost answered that one just out of habit. My thumb actually hovered over the screen before I put the phone face down and reminded myself that every sentence from now on needed to go through Arthur. By lunch, Arthur called and said Teresa's lawyer, Victor Hale, had reached out already. That speed told me they weren't preparing to fight yet, they were preparing to contain the damage. Victor's offer sounded good if you only listened to the surface of it. Teresa would walk away from the house, leave the business untouched, accept a smaller share of the accounts, and agree to a clean break. Then Arthur got to the part that mattered. They wanted a non-disclosure agreement, no public details, no court airing, no more discussion of messages, pressure, pregnancy, or Grant. Teresa wasn't trying to fix anything. She was trying to buy silence with pieces of a life she had already tried to steal. I sat in Arthur's office while he waited for my answer, and for about 10 seconds, I considered taking it. Not because I was scared, but because I was tired in a way I couldn't explain. I wanted my house back, my work back, my mornings back. But then I thought about Teresa sitting across from me in that restaurant, calm as anything, telling me I could either raise another man's child or lose half of what I built. I told Arthur no. He looked at me carefully and said it would get ugly. I said it already was, and for once I wanted the ugly part attached to the right person. The hearing came faster than I expected, which sounds strange because those days felt long, but the actual calendar moved like somebody had cut the brakes. One week, I was sitting in a restaurant listening to Teresa explain why I should raise Grant Sutter's child, and the next, I was walking into a courthouse with a folder full of messages I wished I had never needed to print. Teresa was already there with Victor Hale, dressed like she was going to a professional meeting instead of a divorce hearing she had forced into existence. She looked composed until she saw me, and then her eyes moved to Arthur's briefcase, because by then she knew that whatever I had brought in there was the reason her quiet settlement offer had failed. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. That almost made it worse. No yelling, no big audience, no movie version of justice, just beige walls, a judge who looked like she had heard every excuse people can make, and Teresa sitting across the aisle trying to keep her face still. Arthur told me before we walked in to let him do the talking, and I was glad for it, because I didn't trust myself to sound normal if I had to explain out loud what she had tried to make me accept. The first few minutes were basic paperwork, names, dates, filing details, all of it dry enough that you could almost forget why we were there. Then Arthur stood up with the messages in his hand, and the room changed without anybody raising their voice. He didn't call Teresa names, he didn't make it emotional, he laid it out like a timeline, which somehow made it more humiliating. The trip, the pregnancy, the dinner, the financial pressure, the messages with Grant, the attempt to shape the story afterward. Victor objected when Arthur used the word pressure, but the judge let him continue, and I watched Teresa's jaw tighten like she was hearing the case turn into something she couldn't soften. When Arthur submitted the printed messages, the judge read them silently for what felt like too long. I didn't look at Teresa at first, but when I finally did, she was staring at the table like the wood grain had answers for her. The judge asked if the messages were authentic, and Teresa hesitated just long enough to make the answer worse. Victor leaned toward her and whispered something, but there wasn't much to rescue. She said yes. Then the judge asked whether Teresa knew, while those messages were being sent, that the baby was not mine. Teresa said yes, again, lower this time. Arthur followed with the cafe recording, and that was the part I think she thought we would never use. Her own voice filled the room, calm and controlled, saying the thing she later tried to repaint as fear. Stay married and raise the baby, or divorce and lose what I had built. Hearing it out loud in that room was different from hearing it across a restaurant table. Across the table, it had felt like a threat. In court, it sounded like evidence. Victor tried to make her sound overwhelmed. He said she was scared, emotional, trying to preserve stability during a difficult pregnancy. He said marriages are complicated, which was true in the most useless way possible. The judge didn't seem interested in letting complicated become a hiding place. She asked Teresa whether she denied connecting financial loss to my refusal to accept paternity, and Teresa said no. Not because she wanted to be honest, I don't think. Because there was nowhere else to stand. That was the first time I saw the version of Teresa from the restaurant fully disappear. No calm wife trying to manage a crisis, no reasonable woman offering a solution, just someone whose plan had been read back to her in a room where charm didn't help. The ruling didn't finish everything that day, but it changed the shape of everything. The judge found that Teresa's conduct mattered, that her attempt to tie financial pressure to false paternity expectations would affect how the assets were handled, and that the business and house would remain primarily protected on my side while the final division was completed. Teresa closed her eyes when she heard that. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victory the way people probably imagine. I felt the first solid breath I had taken since that restaurant. Outside the courtroom, Teresa caught up to me near the steps and said, "You didn't have to do this." I stopped, looked at her, and said, "You're right, I didn't have to. But after what you tried to do, I was going to." Then I walked away before she could turn even that into another argument. I didn't go straight home after the hearing. I should have, probably, because the house was finally protected, at least in the way that mattered most, but I couldn't make myself drive there yet. I ended up at a small diner near the edge of town, the kind of place Teresa and I used to pass without noticing because it wasn't nice enough for her and wasn't convenient enough for me. I sat in a booth by the window, ordered black coffee, and just stared at the parking lot for a while. Nothing dramatic happened. No big feeling hit me all at once. I just sat there realizing that the thing she had tried to scare me with had finally been dragged into daylight, and it looked a lot smaller once it wasn't hiding behind her calm voice. My phone kept buzzing while I sat there. Some messages were from clients asking if the business was stable, which was really just a polite way of asking if my personal life was about to leak into their contracts. A few were from people who had clearly heard the courtroom version already and suddenly wanted to sound supportive. I didn't answer most of them. Then, an unknown number came through with one sentence. "You ruined my life. Was it worth it?" I knew it was Teresa before I even finished reading it. For a second, I almost typed something long, something angry, something that explained everything she still refused to understand. Instead, I wrote, "You did that yourself. I just stopped paying for it." Then I blocked the number and set the phone face down on the table. Warren called about 10 minutes later, and I answered because he was one of the few people who had not tried to turn my pain into gossip. He asked if I was okay, and I told him I was fine, which was true enough, but not complete. He said people were already talking, and I said, "Let them." He got quiet for a second, then told me not to let this turn me into somebody cold. I remember looking out at that parking lot and thinking that cold wasn't the right word. I wasn't colder. I was just done handing people the benefit of the doubt after they had already shown me the bill. The final paperwork took longer than the hearing, because that is how these things work. The sharp part happens fast, and then the boring part drags behind it for months with signatures, revisions, asset lists, account statements, and lawyers turning pain into documents. Teresa fought small things at first, then stopped when it became clear every fight opened the door to the same evidence again. Grant didn't stay the way she thought he would either. Once the court record, the pregnancy, and the financial mess became real, he backed away from her in that careful way men like him do when the fantasy starts requiring responsibility. I heard that from someone else, not from Teresa. I didn't go looking for updates, but some news finds you anyway. About 8 months later, she gave birth. I wasn't there, and nobody asked me to be. By then, the paternity challenge was handled, the boundaries were clear, and there was no legal or personal space left for her to drag me back into that story. I didn't celebrate that part because there was still a child in the middle of it, and the child didn't choose any of this. But I also didn't confuse compassion with obligation. That was the line Teresa had tried to erase from the beginning. She wanted me to feel guilty enough to step into a role built on lies, and once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. When the divorce was finalized, I walked out of Arthur's office with a copy of the agreement in a plain envelope. No music, no dramatic speech, no feeling like I had won some great prize. I kept the house, I kept the business. More than that, I kept myself from being rewritten into the villain of a story I didn't create. That mattered more than I expected it to. Teresa had counted on silence, embarrassment, and fear doing half her work for her. She thought I would rather swallow the insult than let people know what happened. She misunderstood one thing. Shame only works as leverage when the wrong person is carrying it. I went home that afternoon and stood in the kitchen for a while. Some of her things were still gone, some spaces still looked strange, and the house didn't magically feel normal just because the paperwork said it was mine. But it was quiet in a way I could live with. I made coffee, opened the back door, and let the air in. I wasn't happy exactly. I was relieved and tired and a little angry that relief had cost that much. Still, I knew I had made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the clean choice, but the one that let me keep my life without pretending her betrayal was something I owed her help with. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If this story pulled you in, please like the video, share it with someone who enjoys real emotional justice stories, and subscribe for more long-form stories like this. I know these situations are messy, and people don't always agree on what the right move is, but that is what makes them worth talking about. What would you have done the moment Teresa gave that ultimatum at dinner? Do you think Nolan was right to take it to court instead of accepting the quiet settlement? And where do you think the biggest warning sign was? The trip, the restaurant, the messages, or the rumor campaign?